Let's build a beautiful box for some beautiful people. My in-laws celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. This box is going to have it all. It's going to have dovetails, miters, an engraved top. We'll install some beautiful Brusso brass hinges, and we'll finish it off with a hand rub shellac finish. Stay tuned. We're going to make this box out of sapele, which is a nice substitute for mahogany, and it has a really pretty iridescence about it once it's finished. And I sized the box to house these 6 coasters that I engraved for them. So with those dimensions in mind, let me mill this up, then we can get to dovetailing. Now, grain selection, obviously very important, sometimes overlooked. This board, we have about half flat sawn material and half rift sawn. On this piece of paper, I cut out a rectangle that represents the front face of the box, and I'm going to use this to help pick out the material for the project. Now, with the flat sawn material, I think there's just way too much going on for such a small field that I'm going to go with the rift sawn material, the straight grain, and go for a nice, clean, modern look. So with our sides milled up, let's cut our dovetails. I usually cut them by hand, but I'm going to mix things up a bit today and cut them at the table saw. With the tails cut, we're now going to transfer those to the pin board, and the pins, we're going to cut those by hand. All right, so that's the rough fit of our box. I made one of these tails, this one here, 1/8 of an inch wider, because when I saw the box open later, we're gonna lose 1/8 of an inch. So this way, when all is said and done, it'll all balance out. All right, what's next? This box needs a top and a bottom, and before we do that, we gotta make some grooves. We're at the router table where we're gonna knock out those grooves. I have an 1/8 inch bit installed, and it's set 1/8 of an inch high to give us a nice 1/8 inch square groove. For the tailboard, those grooves can go all the way through because the ends of the boards will be covered by the pin board. The pin board, those ends will be visible, so for those, we're gonna have to do a stopped groove. All right, moving right along, we have our groove going around the inside of the box. Now we need to make a top and a bottom to fit into it. So I made 2 panels, the size of this opening, plus 1/8 of an inch on all 4 sides. That 1/8 of an inch, we will rabbet, and it will fit right into that groove. So I did yet another dry fit, this time with our newly rabbited top. Everything's coming together just fine. One thing I do want to do, make this a little extra special, is engrave a message for the recipients on the lid. And for that, I'm going to let technology take over, because if I were to hand engrave it, it would look like a drunk third grader did it. All right, so the laser engraver did a really nice job. What I did before the engraving, I applied a few coats of shellac to the wood, and then I put our masking tape down. The laser burned through the masking tape into the wood. I put the shellac down, that way any paint runoff won't go too deep into the pores of the wood. Sapele is pretty open grained, and it'll make cleanup later a lot easier. So what I'm gonna do now is fill in the engraving with gold acrylic paint. All right, we are ready to glue up this project, which is fantastic. We're going to use hide glue, which I've kept in my pocket for the past hour or so because my shop is freezing and hide glue tends to get really thick when it gets cold. I like using hide glue when gluing up dovetails for a number of reasons, primarily for the longer open time and also that it's a little bit more slippery than yellow glue, so I find the parts come together really, really nicely. So we'll glue this up, we'll let it sit overnight. Then in the morning, we'll come back, we'll cut open the box at the table saw, which is always fun. And by fun, I mean really fucking stressful. And then when that's done, a few more steps and we'll have a finished project. So let's knock this out. All right, it's the next day and the box is out of the clamps. Let's clean up the pins and tails, make them flush with the sides. We'll clean them up with a low angle block plane and then we'll cut this guy open. Time to cut open the box. I was half kidding earlier. It doesn't have to be that scary as long as we follow the correct safety procedures. We're going to make 3 passes, and on the 4th pass, we're going to insert a spacer. That's important because with the 4th cut, the lid will now be free, and we don't want it pinching and kicking back at us. So putting a spacer between the 2 pieces, that'll prevent that. So I have a little bit of burning from where I separated the 2 halves. So I taped down some 150 grit sandpaper to my jointer table, nice and dead flat, and I'll just lap both halves. Time to install the hinges. These are Brusso stop hinges. Expensive little suckers, but I really think they're worth it. And thankfully I got these years ago during some sale, got them for like half price. But you know what? This is for my in-laws, so I would have paid 10 times as much because they're worth it. With the hinge mortises done, I'm going to drill some holes for the screws using a self-centering bit. So with the hinges in and operating nice and smoothly, next thing up, dividers for the inside, and we're going to make those out of maple. Now for the liner and the dividers, I milled up some maple to 3/16 of an inch thick. I will cut it to length. I will screw up the ends with this shooting board, and with this shooting board, I'll miter the ends. And in between all that, I'll do some stop grooves on the router table. So with the grooves cut on the interior frame, I can now use the shooting board and sneak up on the perfect fit for the dividers. So with this interior sub-assembly done, we could put a finish on this piece, then we could slide in our sub-assembly and see how everything comes together. I took the hinges off the box. It's going to be a lot easier to finish that way. And for the finish, we're going to go with shellac. Inexpensive, looks great. And once you get the hang of it, it's pretty easy to apply. Out of the can, it's a 2-pound cut, which for me is way too syrupy. So I like to thin it down 1-to-1 with denatured alcohol, making the 2-pound cut of shellac a 1-pound cut, which I really like working with. I'll probably end up putting 6 or 8 coats, which sounds like a lot, but about 10 minutes, it'll be ready for the next coat. It dries super fast. And I'll sand after the first coat because, like with pretty much any finish, it's gonna raise the grain. We wanna knock that down before we go on with the further coats. So I ended up putting 7 or 8 coats of shellac. It went really fast, built up a nice film. Now I'm gonna rub it out with wax and steel wool. You could use something as simple as Minwax paste finishing wax, or if you wanna spend 4 times as much per ounce Renaissance wax, I can't tell the difference. One thing I will say, use good steel wool. The stuff from Home Depot, Lowe's, loaded up with oil. We'll apply the wax directly with the steel wool, rub it in, let it set for a few minutes, then buff it with a clean rag, and we'll have a beautiful clear finish that feels great. So I'm ready to put in the miter divider assembly, but because there are stopped grooves on the sides, I can't drop in the dividers from above. So I'll put the sides in upside down for now. I'll drop in the dividers, then flip it over and drop it in. I went ahead and reattached the lid and it's closing very nicely. So let's load this thing up with our coasters. Wouldn't it be hysterical if they didn't fit? No, that's not funny. We've got the great state of Minnesota. We've got corn, retired farmers. They love watching the hummingbirds outside their window. Marge loves to quilt. Mike loves his college b-ball. and the names of all the grandkids. Really happy with how this project turned out. I love the Brusso hinges with the built-in stops, preventing the lid from flopping all the way back when you open it. These slate coasters, they have a lot of weight to them, so I'm glad I went with a sturdy dovetail construction. I think a mitered box might not be strong enough in the long term. And I love the shellac finish. Really brought out the warmth and the beauty of the sapele, and it really made that gold paint on the top engraving really pop. And finally, to my wonderful in-laws, Mike and Marge, happy 50th. Here's to another 50, probably biologically impossible, but we'll be pulling for you. Until the next video, take care.